Born and raised in Beirut, Lebanon, Maamoun Slayhi is an IT professional specializing in system administration, cloud technologies, and information security. He's also an active member of the Minnesota Palestinian Coalition and other grassroots political groups, passionately advocating for justice in the Middle East with a focus on Lebanon and Palestine. Maamoun was 1/3 of our MEPN in-person event in January last month, and we were so impressed with his knowledge and quiet passion, we invited him to return for a full forum. Maamoun, welcome again to Middle East Peace Now. You have the floor.
Thank you. I really appreciate you inviting me. This is very humbling for me because I don't normally go out and speak. But I think the sitting on the sidelines part has been long gone by now. So I really appreciate you inviting me over. All right, where are we at? Should we take it over?
Sure. Do you want to tell everybody why you have your jacket on first?
Yes. My greenhouse is not really warm enough right now. Yeah, one of the rooms that is my office, it doesn't have central heating, but I do have a fireplace. And I thought, you know what? I'll turn on the fireplace. An hour later, we will have, nice warm toasty room. And little did I know, I walk in and it's just not toasty at all. My heater decided not to heat up as much. So I do apologize. Looks like I have a puffy jacket on. I do have a puffy jacket on. It is a little bit cold in here. I would rather be this than you guys having to hear my kids in the background playing.
It's just fine. Go for it, Mahmoud.
I appreciate it. Well, first thing is first. Again, I want to thank everybody for having me over, and I want to thank you all for taking the time to have this discussion. Without further ado, let's go ahead and have a conversation about what we're going to be talking about today. This presentation is going to explore the complex issues of the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. We're going to examine its historical roots, the current challenges, and the realities faced by the communities involved. So that would be the Lebanese community, the Palestinian community, and also the international community. We will also discuss the implications for Lebanon and the need for international support. So everybody knows that, well, if you didn't know, right, Lebanon hosts a large number of Palestinian refugees. Lebanon has been the historical refuge for Palestinians since the Nakba, the catastrophe since 1948. However, it faces significant challenges due to its limited resources and delicate sectarian balances. Which that affects the treatment and integration of the Palestinian refugees. Lebanon currently hosts 12 refugee camps. 5 of them are in the south of Lebanon, and we have 3 that are in Beirut, and we have 3 in the north and 1 in the Bekaa Valley. Well, the focus is this. Lebanon has been a refuge for displaced communities for a very long time. This isn't the first time that this has been going on, right? We've been the refuge place for the Armenians, Palestinians, Iraqis, Syrians, and a couple other groups as well. Today, Lebanon is going to be hosting the highest number as of about 6 years ago. It is hosting the highest number of refugees per capita. So what we will do is we'll talk more about those as we follow. Followed by the historical context of the Nakba and the key events. We will also assess the current situation of the refugees, and then, of course, the challenges that Lebanon faces and the solidarity shown by the Lebanese society and the pressure fractions that got created due to that. And finally, we're going to talk about what's the potential solutions, what could be done, and what is not being done. So, as I mentioned, Lebanon is a historical refuge. The catastrophe, which is the Nakba actually is not just in 1948. The Nakba kind of started in 1947, went into 1948, went into 1950. 1949, right? But 1948 was the biggest displacement. We're looking at about 750,000 Palestinians that were displaced and they were expelled and they fled their homes. It is important to know the historical context in order for you to understand where does the other communities, um, what the other communities have in mind. Also, what does the international community should understand from the Nakba? So the Nakba, it was a mass displacement of the Palestinians. It was a forced displacement. It wasn't that they came in and they bought their land. That was not the case. It was a forced displacement of over 750,000 Palestinians. There were a lot of massacres that were committed, and every time a massacre was committed in a town, they would say, "You're the next town if you don't leave." So a lot of people were leaving out of fear and out of the fear of ethnic cleansing. That's exactly what was happening to them. Lebanon was a significant acceptor of the refugees, and the influx of the Palestinians refugees, you could see it slowly impacting the social fabric of Lebanon, into the 50s, right? So the 48, 49, 50, 51 into the 58, 1958, and you could see how things drastically started changing in Lebanon due to the influx. Then we'll talk also about UNRWA. A lot of people don't know what UNRWA is. If you do know, I do apologize if I'm repeating myself. But for the people that don't know, UNRWA is a United Nations Relief and Work Agency. It was established in 1949 to support specifically the Palestinian refugees. It is specific for that cause. And today, over 5.9 million Palestinians are registered as refugees, with approximately 210. There's actually more than that. We'll talk more about that in a couple more slides. But as of the latest official ones, it's 210,000. So Lebanon as a historical refuge, also, that's, as I mentioned before, a lot of people may not have known that we've accepted the Armenians in when they had a genocide committed against them, and that was happening from 1915 to 1923. They found refuge and they built a very strong community in Lebanon. There are specific areas that are literally just them. The Armenians integrated into the Lebanese society, but they do keep their identity. So you'll go into areas, they would be speaking Armenian, they know their roots, they know their heritage, but at the same time, they are part of the Lebanese fabric and social fabric as well, right? And then the Palestinians came next in 1948. To this day, they seek safety because they're not able to return to their homes. The Iraqis, since the Iraq War in 2003 to the present, they were fleeing war and sectarian violences. That was happening from 2003 to this day. It wasn't until about 2 years ago when slowly the Iraqi refugees numbers started to go back down instead of being influxing up. Then in 2011, the Syrians were escaping civil war. In 2011, the civil war in Syria, which just ended on our watch just a few months ago, which is awesome. And it's a great thing that has happened. And I hope nothing but good comes out of it. But they were fleeing civil war and destruction, and that also influxed the amount of refugees that were in Lebanon. What you have to understand is Lebanon is not a big country. You could probably fit about maybe 15 Lebanons in Minnesota, right? A little bit less than that. But Lebanon is not a very large country, and it already has about 4 to 5 Lebanese citizens themselves. And there's actually a much bigger population outside of Lebanon that is actually the main source of income into Lebanon as well. And while Lebanon has extended its hospitality, like I said, it is delicate, right? We have a very fragile economy. We have a very limited resources, right? And because nobody's helping us, and if there is any help, it doesn't make that much of a dent in the requested part of the help that is needed. And then there was struggles also within Lebanon, because Lebanon has had a sectarian problem itself. So let's talk about the limited resources. Like I mentioned, there is economic struggles. Lebanon is economically was very strong back in the 30s and 40s into the 50s. And though that economy kind of got destroyed with the civil war, the Lebanese civil war, and also with external forces that were coming in and that were causing issues. Everybody knows that when you are in a war, your economy is gonna tank. Your economy is not gonna be doing very well. Your economy is gonna be in recovery for a while after the war is done. And so Lebanon faces those challenges, and will continue facing them to this day. Um, because of this influx, and the influx was not slowly over many, many, many years. A lot of these influxes were happening, in large sums at a time. It impacted the public services. Again, Lebanon has very limited resources, so that means you have limited public services, which leads to decreased qualities in the public services, in the infrastructure itself, even. So that leads us to the living conditions, right? There's lack of resources that severely impacted the living conditions. And the lack of resources that impacted the living conditions, it wasn't just impacting the Palestinians, but it was impacting the Lebanese citizens themselves, and of course, other refugees that have sought Lebanon. Now, this is where we're going to talk a little bit why we may see some issues that may arise in Lebanon. Lebanon has a unique sectarian cosmopolitan of many different sects of religions, right? So you have the Christians, you have the Muslims, we used to have a Jewish community that no longer is there, but it used to be one of those things where each of them has their own sects as well, and that was a very delicate process that in order for everybody to be living harmoniously together during the times after the Ottoman Empire left, right? So the Lebanon was not by itself, right? Lebanon was never a country on its own. Lebanon was always a state, if you want to say, and it's not the current Lebanon that we know. So when the Ottoman Empire left, there was the greater Lebanon and Syria. Actually, there was Bilad al-Sham, and the Sham area was supposed to unite, which was Palestine, what now is known as Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. And that got cut off by the British and the French. And the British said, no, 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 we have, the Balfour, and then they cut Palestine, and then there was, more cutting that was happening. So Jordan got taken out and given to the Hashemite family, and then there was Lebanon and Syria left together, and that was going to be the greater Lebanon, Syria, and then that got cut in the idea of making Lebanon more of the Christian. Arabs can be there if they want to be, because the Maronites were really, really vocal about wanting to be separate. But it wasn't, again, we're talking about people who were able to get the ears of the leadership, right? So they were like, we'll create Lebanon. But the problem is Lebanon couldn't be just for one set of people. You can't just tell people, sorry, you were Lebanese for thousands of years, but too bad, not anymore. Now you're going to go and live in this other area that we're going to have over there. And we think that's Syria, and, that was not going to work. With that being said, that means you have people that don't see eye to eye on everything, but it was a very volatile time. And after the independence of Lebanon, it became better, but that volatility was building and festering underneath all of that. and then it came to a head during the civil war. The refugee influx in Lebanon, it posed challenges and increased competition for resources. Again, Lebanon is a small country, has the resources, but it is limited. We don't have oil. We just found about 5 or 6 years ago that there is gas off the coast, which now we are trying to get into. So there's not really vast resources. So we always counted on the international community in helping, but even then, it was not enough with the influxes that we were getting. And then, of course, there's the tension among the groups. So it's not just the sectarian groups that had tensions, but then there were Lebanese people that had some kind of resentment and hatred towards the Palestinians because they saw them as, you came, you made this system even weaker than it is, and you brought your trouble with you, and now we have to deal with it. Again, this is not all of the Lebanese people, but this was kind of there's a sentiment there, a minority sentiment, but it was there that caused issues. That's where these, some of the militias, like the Kata'ib militias, that it's a Christian militia, right? They were kind of like that. And then you had the Druze militia, right? And they had problems with them as well. But everybody finds, especially during the Civil War, loyalties kept switching and changing, and everybody wanted a piece of something. So you got to look at it as, this is Lebanon. It's a very volatile place, and any changes to its fabric, it actually makes it, explode in some way, right? Something's going to happen, and because something's got to give. We can't look to the future without looking to the past. So as I've mentioned, and do bear with me if I do repeat myself again, I do apologize, but to understand the current situation, it is essential to examine the historical context. So that includes the Nakba of 1948, the establishment of Lebanon as a refuge, and the key events that, that later on went on to happen. So some of the key events that we're going to talk about is the 1969 Cairo Agreement, the Civil War in Lebanon, and the 1982 Israeli invasion. The 1969 Cairo Agreement came after the PLO at that time had presence, a very large presence in Lebanon. And the Palestinian refugees in Lebanon, up to that time, they definitely, I would say, they were on the fringe of the Lebanese society, right? And they experienced constant, pressure since then, and they were always in crisis. There's always one thing leading to the next thing. Even though Lebanon was a refuge for them, the Lebanese resistance was at a rise, and the same thing was there, the Palestinian resistance. The Palestinian resistance started out, and then you had, like I mentioned, the PLO started gaining traction, and they started gaining momentum. And because when, let me go back. Sorry, let me go back 1 second. You need to understand where that came from, right? That came from how the Lebanese government handled the refugees when they were coming in. So up until 1958, the refugees were mostly welcomed by the population, right? Up until 1958, there was no problems. We were welcoming them. We saw them as displaced people. It was their displacement was going to be temporary, and we were more than happy to have them over. Then, following the Lebanese turmoils of 1958, right, there was essentially like problems happening in Lebanon due to that. So at that time, President Fuad Shihab, used the Army Intelligence Bureau, which called the Deuxième Bureau. And the Deuxième Bureau was used to police and control the camps. So the refugee camps were being controlled by this secondary bureau, the Deuxième Bureau. And for about 10 years, the Palestinians were severely restricted. So in all aspects of life, right? They needed permits to leave their camp and go to another camp. They needed permits to go from camp to camp. They needed permits to have any meetings that are outside of their camps. There was any meetings that were of non-domestic nature. So like if people wanted to meet up and like discuss political things or discuss wanting to, how can we resist and get back to our homeland, that was kind of shut down because they were like, we're not going to allow this. And so this all came from the top, from the president of Lebanon at that time. And you know, simple things like listening to radio and reading newspapers was forbidden. Like so it was really, really restrictive to them. And you're talking, you know, they didn't have great living conditions either. So because they were refugees and things had to go up fast, latrines, for an example, had to be set up. People didn't have private bathrooms. You just had to walk and go somewhere to go to the bathroom. So, and that did not change. So like for 10 years, this is what you were having, right? And that's what the refugees of Lebanon, not Lebanon, sorry, of Palestine were going through. So finally, the refugees, you know, had enough. And the situation, being in exile, losing your homeland, and being a refugee, and going through what you were going through at that moment, the Palestinians decided, you know what? We need to fight back. All that came from the people becoming more and more educated. UNRWA actually had the biggest hand in that. UNRWA, it allowed the increase of the education levels, right? So all the services that were being provided by UNRWA kind of gave the space for more educated people, which created a generation of teachers, young professionals, and people who led revolutions, right? So after the defeat of 1967, of the 1967 war, which is a whole other topic on its own, there was an unplanned revolt in 1969. The residents across the camps, they went up in arms and they chased out the Deuxième Bureau, right? They were not mad at the Lebanese people. They were mad at the Lebanese government. They were fed up with the Deuxième Bureau. So they actually were able to get the Deuxième Bureau out of the refugee camps, and outside the refugee camps, they kind of created parameters. And at that time, Yasser Arafat, who was elected the chair of the Palestinian Liberation organization, that's what the PLO is, and the Lebanese army commander for the Palestinians, there was an agreement granted to the Palestinians. And that's what you're looking at there is the 1969 Cairo Agreement, right? It was a pivotal moment for the Palestinian community because it allowed them, it granted them the rights to manage their own camps. So the Lebanese army doesn't go in there. The Lebanese police doesn't go in there, right? They manage their own camps. And they allow them to engage in armed struggles in coordination with the Lebanese army. So they coordinate with the Lebanese army so they can actually start having armed resistance. So as the operations, increased military operations were being done against Israel in order for them to gain their land back. With that, during that time, the Lebanese civil war was raging, right? So during that time, the Lebanese civil war was raging. And the Lebanese civil war lasted from 1970 until 1990, late 1990. And during that time, the people who wanted power started aligning themselves with whoever can get them that power. And the PLO did not stop fighting either, right? So the PLO at that time had a very large um, existence in Lebanon, and they were fighting and they were trying to get their lands back, not in Lebanon, but in Palestine, right? The occupied land, the occupied territories, they were trying to get it back. So that's their armed resistance. And at that time, the PLO, they were aligning themselves also with the people during the civil wars, right? So the civil war of Lebanon, there was an increased Palestinian-Lebanese tension because they would align themselves with the right people, and then the other people would be like, they're against us, and they just didn't, they couldn't find the perfect ground, if you want to say, right? You can't, because in a civil war, somebody is wrong. Somebody is wrong, or maybe everybody is wrong, right? And in this situation, just everybody wanted something, and that was not going to happen, and it landed us in a big, big mess, which was the civil war. And in 1976, these militias, the Christian militias, they laid siege on multiple camps. There was a camp called Camp Tel el-Zatar and Jisr al-Bashir, Jisr al-Basha, sorry, Jisr al-Basha. And the residents were massacred. So there about 4,000 Palestinians were massacred over the term of about 7 months. And even after the siege was done, 1,500 more residents were murdered after the camp surrendered. So they aligned themselves, the Palestinian refugees aligned themselves with the Lebanese national movement. And the Palestinians were drawn into the Lebanese civil war, right? They're trying to stay out of it. They're trying to do their own thing. The Lebanese civil war is going on. Those items happened, and then they aligned themselves with the Lebanese national movement, and that's where things started to break down, right? Because the Lebanese state itself broke down further, and essentially you didn't have a Lebanese government anymore, and people were just fighting against each other. And the PLO continued to grow its influence, and it was accused of forming a state within a state, which is not true, but kind of true at the same time. Not true in the sense of they didn't do it maliciously, but true in the sense of they needed to manage their own people and they needed to manage what they were doing at the same as well. And that wasn't until 1980. That was happening until 1982. In 1982, Israel invaded Lebanon, and it wanted to expel the PLO because the PLO was creating so much pressure that they didn't like it, and then they were also exerting armed resistance from Lebanon. They decided we already want Lebanon, we're gonna go in and invade it, and we're just gonna take what we can. So they went ahead, and in September of 1982, the Phalangist militias, backed by the Israelis, they went into Sabra and Shatila, which is two Beirut refugee camps. And I actually our house is about 3 blocks from there. They went in the morning, like before sunrise, and they murdered more than 3,000 Palestinians, and the Israeli army was with them, and they created a siege around the camps. And 3,000 Palestinians and Lebanese civilians, because the camps, how they are, they're not really just by themselves. They were built in, but then there was also the cities around it. So Lebanese people who couldn't afford it, sometimes they would end up, in areas that are part of the refugee camps. So Lebanese civilians were also massacred during that time, but mainly 3,000 Palestinians were massacred in Sabra and Shatila camps, which followed by a series of intense siege and bombing. And lo and behold, Amal, which is a Shia militia, aligned themselves as well with the Phalangists. Well, they're against the Phalangists, but they took this as an opportunity. So they started bombing several camps in Beirut and the south. from 1983 until 1987. So as a consequence, these repeated assaults in the 1980s, much of the PLO and the civilian infrastructure was destroyed. So now take this beautiful mess, which is Lebanese civil war, Palestinian-Lebanese tension, traitors that align themselves with Israel, and heavy shelling on the ground, heavy bombardment from the air, heavy bombardment and shelling coming from all over into Beirut, into the south of Lebanon, and now you have an infrastructure that has been destroyed. So not only did the Palestinians suffer from that, the Lebanese people also suffered from that. So you're under your infrastructure is destroyed. Your services are no longer there. People didn't have places to run during that time. Many Lebanese people. That's why you have a large Lebanese immigrants all over the world. Some of the largest are in like Brazil, and some of it is in the U.S. as well. They left during the Civil War. A lot of them left during the Civil War, including my uncle. My uncle, who was the youngest boy, my dad told him that he should go, and he went to Oman, and from there he ended up going to the U.S. and he stayed here until his passing a few years ago. And he is actually the reason why I'm here. He applied in 1986. He applied for us to come to the U.S., and we didn't even get our approval until 1996, the summer of 1996. So I'm nothing but one story of millions, right? There are millions of stories that are exactly or similar to what my story is. And that is all due to the events that we just went over. So at the end of the Lebanese war, it brought increased insecurity to the marginalized Palestinian refugees. So they were evicted from squatter areas. They suffered reductions in the UNRWA services. And additionally, in 1994, the Oslo Agreement that Yasser Arafat signed, who was the head of the PLO at that time, it cut the PLO even further, because part of the agreement, right, the Palestinian leadership and the international community started shifting funds from the PLO to the Palestinian Authority, which you know today is the one responsible over the West Bank. So the refugees formerly, which are the core of the national movement, are now being pushed to the sidelines. They felt betrayed, which is very rightfully so, right? And they feared that their leadership would renounce their rights of return to historical Palestine. So, and then almost all of the PLO created organizations that were created to serve that community collapsed. So it created a service gap, and it reduced, employment opportunities for the Palestinian refugees. The community, couldn't keep up with the demands of things. So the community itself started building services. It was non-government organizations, right? They were led by people for the people, if you want to say, and that they provided basic services such as like childcare, tutoring, vocational training, supplemental health services. One thing that you would understand, no matter which Arab you are, the biggest thing for us is education. Our parents drill it into us. Education, education, education. If you're not educated, you're not going to really know how you need to respond to things in this world. And that was the biggest thing that they had. And you will see a lot of the Palestinians are very, very well educated, even though they are from refugee camps and they are in refugee camps. Many of my friends were Palestinian and they're very well educated, and 3 of them actually came to the US, became doctors, and now they are American citizens, but they are doctors. All 3 of them are doctors. And that's just, again, a small story of millions upon millions that are that been around. Now, with that being said, right, what is the current refugee situation in Lebanon? The refugee status situation in Lebanon, especially the Palestinian refugee status, right? That's what we're specifically talking about. Has a population of, latest numbers actually are pulling about 250,000 to 300,000 individuals, but they're not living in an okay way, right? It's very harsh areas that they are living in. They're not very well maintained. As you see here, many Palestinian refugees, they reside in overcrowded, right, under-resourced camps. They face marginalized issues. And then the challenges that they face, unlike other host countries, Lebanon never naturalized the Palestinians, the Palestinian refugees, to its delicate sectarian balance. Refugees, like we said, they reside in 12 camps across of Lebanon, but they had no citizenship rights, they had no voting rights, they had limited access to jobs. So about 30, as I said here, 39 plus, we're looking at about 43, I think, jobs that they're not allowed to hold in Lebanon. And there was restriction on property ownership, which again restricts them to the camps. Not a lot of people can actually leave the camps and own outside the camps unless if you become really well-to-do because there are some restrictions on what you can own and what you can do. And they were very dependent on the UNRWA and the NGOs for education and healthcare and aid. Lebanon could only provide so much, but also produce these restrictions. Now, it's important to note that these restrictions were not just set for the sake of making it hard on the refugees. I do have to preface with, it does create hardship, and I don't agree with a lot of it. And I do think that there should be, there should be some kind of a middle ground. But Lebanon did this deliberately, right? And Lebanon withheld the citizenship deliberately from the Palestinian refugees, and it was part of its commitment to the principle of them returning to their homeland. So granting them citizenship implies permanent resettlement, which Lebanon, alongside with all the surrounding Arab world, views as a recognition of the loss of the Palestinian land. And it compromises the right to return home. So by maintaining their refugee status, Lebanon ensures that the international community remains aware and of the unresolved issue of Palestine and the Palestinian displacement. This also prevents the Israelis from using this as we're seeing right now, right? It prevents them from using the argument that Palestinians are content to be integrated into another society. There's always this thought that is always put out there, which is, why can't they just be part of this? Why can't they just, right now we're hearing it, why can't they just go into Egypt? Egypt can take some, and Jordan can take some, and some other Arab countries can take some, and then everything will be fine. But that's their land. You can't just kick people out of their land. And then people of other countries, they're okay accepting refugees, but at the same time, it's not okay to just kick people off of their land. And by not giving them some of these rights, it's a double-edged sword. You're trying to make sure that they don't lose their right to return home. You're trying to make sure that they don't lose their international stage, if you want to say. But at the same time, it causes issues. It means that you can't really integrate into society, and it causes tensions in that area. But Lebanon's stance serves as a symbolic and practical measure to protect the Palestinian identity, right? As much as I don't like some of it, but there's an idea behind it is we want to protect the Palestinian identity and the hope for a future return, while also keeping the cause of the Palestinian justice alive on the global stage. So that's the important part that we need to. I would like to just kind of put a line under, is that yes, there are areas that need improvement, and I agree with that, and many people are trying to get that done, but there's some things that we can't just say because it's been 70 years, we're just gonna let it happen. But you can't. You can't, because that just essentially tells us that the struggle is dead. The refugee camps, as I mentioned, are not really that great. And historically, no refugee camp has really been great, right? They're put up fast. They're trying to essentially for a temporary displacement, but unfortunately, we've seen it time and time again that they're not temporary. And then because they're not temporary and because they were allowed to govern themselves, there was a lot of mismanaged growth of buildings and things that were put up in there kind of in illegal ways, but that also caused issues as what you see on your screen. You had limited that created limited access to clean water, inadequate healthcare facilities, overcrowded living conditions. So when people say people are living on top of each other, it's not an exaggeration. You literally have apartment buildings on top of another apartment building, and this apartment building is on top of this one right over here. They made an extension, and it's like, this is illegal, but they're inside the camps, which kind of like they have their own rules, if you want to say, which those rules no longer exist since, those organizations are now led by the civilians, if you want to say, and there was lack of basic infrastructure. As you see here on your screen, in 2012, there was a study done by the British Medical Journal, and 31% of those were surveyed with chronic illness, 24% had acute illness in the 6 months before the survey, and 55% are in psychological distress. These numbers only grow. To this day, they are dealing with the same thing, and there is generational trauma that is there, and it also causes psychological distress. And that itself creates people who are volatile, and it's not their fault, but it creates people that are volatile, which creates more tension, and tension creates more volatility, and things are bound to explode again, which they did in 2007. There was one that happened in 2007. There was a fight that broke out in one of the refugee camps in Beirut, and I'm trying to remember the name of it. I do apologize. I'm drawing blank. It's Jisr something, meaning the bridge of. It will come to me. But essentially, 100 people that were armed, they wanted to go up in resistance, and the Lebanese army stood against them, and that went on for about 30 days, and it just caused a lot of casualties, and that refugee camp itself was mostly destroyed. Not all of it, but most of it, about 60%. And from 2007 to now, that refugee camp still is not fully 100% operational. You'd think by now it is, but it is not. And yes, sorry, I'm pulling up my notes here. Yes, Nahr al-Barid. So the cold river, that's what translates to Nahr al-Barid, the cold river. There was a conflict was caught there. It was 100 days. I apologize, I said 30 days. It was 100 days. And it was the Lebanese army and it was a non-Palestinian group that was there called Fath al-Islam, right? And but because they were inside the refugee camp, they're non-Palestinian, but they were fighting for the Palestinian. Again, things get complicated, and so things get muddied also in the water quite a bit. With that being said, we also had, as we mentioned, there was the lack of citizenship and jobs. You had legal barriers that were put in place for the citizenship, unless if you came from, like you were coming in to invest in Lebanon, or you had the right people, or you had Lebanese ancestry, you would not be able to get the citizenship. And we spoke about why is that, why was that put in place? But there was restriction on employment access, right? Legal restrictions that severely limited their employment. And I think that was a miss on the Lebanese government. But you can see how that marginalizes them as well again, and that causes the tensions yet again. So what are the challenges for Lebanon? Let's talk about the challenges for Lebanon itself. Lebanon, again, is a small country with its own problems. And refugees cause a huge economic strain. The presence of large refugee populations places additional strain on the Lebanese economy, which is already struggling with its own debt and inflation. To give you an example, right now in Lebanon, we use lira. Lira is our currency, and the Lebanese lira used to be 1,500 lira, Lebanese lira, would be equivalent to $1. And 1,500 lira would buy you a little bit more than what $1 would buy you. You know, let's just say like a sandwich and a pop, right? From 2017 to now, that $1 is now equivalent to 80,000 Lebanese lira. So picture that. You went from, if you were making, I don't know, if you were making like 500,000 Lebanese lira, you were living a month, you were living very comfortably. You were not very, but you were living comfortably. You were middle class. Now, that doesn't really do much for you anymore. That's how bad the inflation got, especially after the destruction of the port. The port of Beirut was suffered a massive explosion, which to this day is still debatable what caused it. But again, that's another thing on its own. But since then, the banking sector collapsed, and it caused a major inflation. And again, like I mentioned, it's a small country. We're about 5 million, close to 5 million citizens, right? But everybody is suffering from its economic issues. And the refugee population, not refugee, but like the population of Lebanese that are outside of Lebanon are providing a lot of that money coming into Lebanon, which is the same thing happening for the Palestinian refugees. The Palestinian refugees are also, they are outside of Lebanon. Because they wanted to flee, they went from they became refugees themselves, and then from being refugees, they went ahead and left, and they went to all countries across the world, and now they send money to their family members that are still in Lebanon, in Lebanese refugee camps, and about 91% of that money coming in is being used for them, and the Palestinian refugees are actually accounted to about 10 to 16% of the economy of Lebanon, which is, a significant portion, right? A portion that could make a dent in the economy. And so back to Lebanon, we have high debt levels, right? We are burdened, Lebanon is burdened by high debt. We can't really even go and ask for more money even. Like we're at that point where we can't even go and ask for more money from I'm blanking again, from the World Federal Reserve. And because after the inflation that happened, and the collapse of the bank sector, our score went down drastically. So from here, you also were faced with high unemployment, right? So now you have Lebanese guys and Lebanese women, right? Lebanese citizens that are trying to get jobs, and they cannot even find jobs. At the same time, You have refugees. Now you got to take into account it's not just the Palestinian refugees. You have Palestinian refugees, Syrian refugees, Iraqi refugees, and not everybody is going to do the same job, right? And there's some jobs that the Lebanese person is like, I wouldn't do that. But some of them will do that for the sake of, I need to make money and I don't care how I make it, right? Like, such as, I don't know, maybe you're a grocery boy and you're just running errands for and running the groceries to people's houses and things like that. Um, that causes tension because now the mentality goes to, well, you're stealing my job. It's kind of, you see that here in the US where people say, oh, the immigrants are stealing our jobs. The reality of it is the economy is already not that great. And the refugee did not steal my job. It's just that maybe the ones that are, that have made it that far are going to be competing against you, but it's not just them. It's them plus every other Lebanese person that is trying to get that job. So there is limited job opportunities. And then the high unemployment contributes to social unrest, and it contributes to more tensions, and it contributes to, instability in the region. And as I was saying, the Lebanese economy, right, there was a collapse in 2019. I said 2017 because that's when kind of the first signs started to show up in 2017, but 2019 truly things kind of collapsed, and like that's where we ended up with. Right now it's even better. We're at 80,000 Lebanese lira per dollar. At one point it made it to 120,000 Lebanese lira per $1. The limited public services and security concerns of political tensions. So we already talked about it, but with this influx and with them being there and with the increased numbers that they are going to be there, right? Because they're not going to be constant. They're going to be growing, right? People are going to get married. People are going to have children. And they're going to still be refugees themselves. They're going to have the refugee status, even though they were born and raised in Lebanon, for an example. This influx, it strains the public services, including the healthcare and education system. So our education system, we have public education, which is for free, and we have private education as well. But to send your kids to private schools, you have to pay, and in American dollars, it's not a lot of money, but in Lebanese lira, it's quite a bit of money. Even before the inflation, it was quite a bit of money. You would have to be kind of middle class, upper middle class, in order for you to send your kids to private school. And if you do send them to private school and you're not middle class, you're working night and day just to be able to send your kids to those schools, because the public schools are good, but they started collapsing due to those influxes. Also, you have security concerns. The presence of the refugees raises security concerns, and it leads to increased tensions. That's because you're talking about people who want to go back to their homeland, and they want to be able to resist. But then how they're going to do that? How are they going to do that? So they're going to have to be able to determine this thing on their own. And when they used to work with the Lebanese army before the civil war kind of erupted, that was a good kind of compromise, right? You can do armed resistance. We will be with you. We will figure this thing out together. But now it's kind of happening in secrecy, but it's not really in secrecy. It's like we know, but we really can't do much about it right now because we're busy with this entire dumpster fire that is happening over here. And then, of course, you have political tensions, right? The sectarian groups, they started being imbalanced, if you want to say. Lebanon is about 47% Christian with different sects of Christianity, but 47% Christian and about 49% Muslim. And then you have the percentage difference that is, atheist or any other groups. And the influx of the refugees, if they were, see, that's the other problem why some of them cannot become citizens, because there's been push from the Christian side and the Shia side to not have them, even though they sometimes they say well, they stand with them, but at the same time there's a push not to have them as citizens, because then that will increase the amount of Muslim Sunnis, because the majority, not all of them, but the majority are Muslim Sunnis. But there is also Christian Palestinians as well. Lebanon's and the Lebanese solidarity. Despite all these challenges, right, there is a significant amount of solidarity within the Lebanese towards the Palestinian right. Various civil society organizations and international agencies work tirelessly to support these refugees. I know I kind of painted this doom and gloom, but it's not just it's not like just that, right? It's not doom and gloom. People are trying to help. There is a huge solidarity for the Palestinian people in there. So your civil society, right? The Lebanese civil society demonstrated resilience in advocating for the Palestinian rights. Lebanon's political social movement historically has always been for the Palestinian cause, and many Lebanese, they view the Palestinians as victims of injustice. We don't really see them as refugees, and I never call them a refugee. I just call them a Palestinian, right? A person that was displaced, a person that suffered injustice. So part of the things that were being done, again, Lebanon doesn't have resources. Lebanon doesn't have a lot of money, right? And even our army could use quite a bit of, money dumped into it because we don't have enough. But there is civil services that are being created. The living conditions are slowly getting to be a little bit better, right? Slowly and slowly, things are becoming better. There are efforts being made to improve their living conditions. And then, of course, there are campaigns and initiatives, right? You have various groups, like I mentioned, that are ongoing for their rights, and not just their rights to return home, but also their rights within the Lebanese society, where they essentially are advocating for, let's keep their right to return home, but at the same time, let's give them more rights to be here in order for them to give more to this land that is holding them for right now. The civil society efforts are essentially to support refugees, right, and education services, healthcare services, legal assistance, getting them, they may want to leave Lebanon, they want to go to the US, they want to go to Europe, somewhere in Europe, they want to go to the UK, right? These are all being provided to them. Numerous NGOs focus on providing essential support for the Palestinian refugees. The UNRWA has actually put in money. So the Lebanese government has taken that, and they work hand in hand with the Lebanese government. They created schools, which is, again, it's in order for them to have better education. So you will notice that, for example, I was just in Lebanon last year, and there used to be this tiny school at the entrance of the Sabra refugee camp, right? There's an area, it's called Sabra, and then you would go in there, and it'd be Sabra and then Shetila. And then there was a small school. When I went down, I haven't been there for like 8 years. And when I went down, I was surprised. That school is gone. And now for about a block and a quarter, it was this giant school that was built. And this school was also like, it looked brand new, right? It looked like this was a brand new school, probably about a year old, and it was serving the refugees. Again, granted, this isn't just for the Palestinian refugees, but this is just one of them that is mainly Palestinian refugees, but you also had the Syrian refugees. And again, we still have Iraqi refugees and Syrian refugees, but the majority are Palestinian refugees. In that, I would like to talk about also UNRWA. I know that it doesn't really talk about the challenges, but I wanted to bring it up because of the attack that UNRWA had on it. I wanted to kind of focus a little bit just on UNRWA, right? UNRWA was created for the Palestinian refugees, and it was created to help them out after they suffered the catastrophe, the Nakba, in 1948. So UNRWA was provided vital services to support Palestinian refugees, right? And their support in Lebanon, the UNRWA of Lebanon, plays a critical role in addressing the challenges faced by the Palestinian refugees. It offers necessary assistance, and it also offers protections at some times, and also creates diplomatic initiatives. So they work towards resolving issues that are faced by the Palestinian refugees in the Lebanese refugee camps. Their challenges are, as always, just like any other organization, but they're much more exacerbated in Lebanon. There's chronic underfunding and reliance on donor support, right? We all have gotten those. I don't know about you guys, but I always get them. People always are, UNRWA is always asking for donations, right? And that's what they largely spend their time trying to get. They try to get individual contributions. And so they're chronically underfunded. The US and some Western countries have cut the funding, which worsen the conditions. They make it sound, right, all these countries that have cut the funding, they made it sound like as if UNRWA is taking a large sums of money. And it wasn't. Whatever it was barely sufficient. But now they cut it even further, and now it's going to exacerbate the situation even further, where they don't have money in order to fund the services, which will rise the refugee status a little bit better. And then, of course, we have limited ability to support the growing refugee population amidst also the Lebanese crisis itself. So those are what UNRWA is having. Now, looking ahead, what is the future of the Palestinian refugee in Lebanon? It requires significant international support. And it requires quite a bit of coordinating and effort to have a sustainable solution, and ensuring that the Lebanese population and the Palestinian population are both served well. So the need for international support. There is an important part, which is the Palestinian refugees have many issues in Lebanon, but collaborating among governments and NGOs and international agencies, we can help improve their living condition and provide resources, which in turn will alleviate some of the tensions and pressure that is on Lebanon and the Lebanese government. So the international support is crucial. The Palestinian refugee issue will only get worse if that is not something that is addressed. The collaboration among the agencies and improving the living condition is one of the biggest ones. If you improve the living condition, you remove some of the restrictions, right, that are put in by the Lebanese government, we may have a different outcome in the future. The solutions for the refugees. The biggest one, and that's why I put it number one, is the right of return. Right? These are just, in my opinion, the possible solutions. But these are also like opinions that have been put out there. The first one, and the one that we all want to see, is the right of return. Enforcement of the international law that allows Palestinians to return to their homeland. And that was under the protection of law of the UN Resolution 194, where they can rebuild their homeland and live there safely, and they can create what they want to create. But Israel has consistently refused that. In the meantime, what we can do is as I mentioned, we have community integration. Integrate the refugees into the local communities, right? Let's remove these refugee camps that have been around now for 70 years, right? Let's call them what they are, right? This is the Palestinian area, sure. Whatever you want to call it, we call it that. But let's go ahead and have proper zoning, proper infrastructure built into it, integrate them into the society. They are integrated in our society, but because of the restrictions they have, they're limited. So integrate them into local communities to help foster understanding, acceptance, right? Because The newer generation has always had acceptance to it. Some of the older generation don't have the same acceptance. So, right? And then vice versa. There's some people who are now coming in and they don't have that acceptance because they don't understand their struggle. They don't understand their struggle, and they didn't come during a time that they saw what they had to go, what the Palestinian refugees had to go through, right? So it's like this kind of wave of understanding, not understanding, understanding and not understanding, and that always comes in waves because they're always the generation that come and they're during rest times and they don't know what the refugees have to go through, and then unrest happens, such as what just happened in Gaza, and it opens up their eyes, and then they're like, oh, that's what they had to deal with. It's not just words on paper. It's not words in history. This is a continuous thing that is continuously happening, and that's what they suffered through, what their families suffered through. So we should have more sympathy, and we should try to help them. And then access to rights and services. Improving their access to services is essential in order for them to be part of the society, and in order for them to feel like, you know, to have the dignity of a human being, right? That's the biggest issue, is that they need to have that capability of feeling, I'm a human, I'm being treated as a human, and I'm given my rights as a human and my access to services that could help me have a better life. Stability for Lebanon. There is an importance over stability. If there's no stability, you can forget it. This whole thing is just going to be a continuous, um, you know, reiterations of the same issues over and over again. So stability in Lebanon is crucial for the well-being of both the Lebanese citizens and the Palestinian refugees to ensure peaceful coexistence. There's economic challenges. We address that, right? But if Lebanon can address its economic challenges, and we can integrate those refugees into our society, maybe then, and only maybe then, we will have a better economy that could be built back up, right? There's a long road ahead for the Lebanese economy, unless if somehow we strike, one of the biggest reserves of oil in our land. It's going to be a long road, but if we are consistent with it, I think in 15, 20 years we'll be back, right? And we've done it before. It's not like it's not been done before. Lebanon got rebuilt in the 90s. I grew up during that era of rebuilding, and we've done it before, and I believe it can be done. But we need to address those things. We need to address the economic challenges in order for us to move forward and benefit all the communities in Lebanon. And we need to foster social cohesion, right? Enhance the social cohesion among different communities. It can lead to more stable, harmonious environment in Lebanon, right? Again, that better understanding of what did the refugees have to go through. We are here to help them. Let's actually stick to our first instinct, which was help, right, and be there for them, and forget and try to remove that tension and whatever hatred you may have had, or whatever, it's not hatred. Sometimes it's just kind of like the dislike that you may have had, right? Remove that out of your heart so that way you can actually create a cohesion. And if we look at ourselves as one singular unit, we're all Lebanese, and slowly Lebanon got there, but then of course there's always these infractions that happen that causes friction and division in the society. But we're slowly getting there, which is also, we're all Lebanese. It doesn't matter who you are. I don't care you're Christian. That's one thing I've mentioned in the meeting we've had before, but I'll mention it here, which is I don't care who you are. If you're Lebanese, you're my brother, you're my sister. We're gonna work this together, and because Lebanon is for all of us, and that type of conversation needs to be had and needs to be created, because the minute there is a cohesion over the identity and no longer sectarianism, then and only then they will be actually we will be able to build further. So, in conclusion, Lebanon's role as a host for the Palestinian refugees is a testament to its humanitarian commitment, but it comes at a cost, economic and social challenges, right? The Lebanese people do stand in solidarity with the Palestinians, but sustainable solutions must be found. The international community must recognize Lebanon's burden and provide meaningful support. And the true resolutions lie in addressing the root cause. Again, we can't say remove, you know, this bad thing. I was going to use the analogy of cancer, right? If there is cancer in the body, you can't just come in and say we're going to remove this part, but forget about everything else. The root cause, where it came from, what's causing it to come, because it will just grow back again. And only then we will see changes. And I will leave you with the questions and answers. This is, I found this quote about a few years ago, and I found it to be inspiring and interesting at the same time because it is Thomas Jefferson, and where we're living and what we're living with right now, this sits very well. When injustice becomes law, resistance becomes duty. And that's what I'll close with. I'll open it up, I guess, right?
Maamoun, what was the last word? Resistance becomes
Resistance becomes duty.
doing? Doing. Doing.
Duty.
Duty. Thank you.
Duty.
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 Thank you.
Duty.
I have one word. Wow. Where do you laid out solutions, possible solutions to turn this around for Lebanon, and obviously not a single one of them is easy.
Mm-hmm.
I think this is one of the questions, and I'm going to put it out right away. Well, first of all, several people are asking if you would email to MEPN the PowerPoint, and then we can email it to our
Sure.
constituents. Is that all right?
Yeah, that is all right. I'm
Okay.
okay with that.
Okay. The question is, obviously, Lebanon has a new prime minister. It's the president or the prime minister who is new. Well,
Both.
both. But which
Both.
one the president selected the
The
prime minister?
president select the president
Yes.
selects the prime minister. Yep.
Yes, that's right. How will this new government help to advance some of these potential solutions to help turn things around?
Yeah. Do you want me to stop sharing, or?
Sure.
And I just wanted to check. I don't know. Some people like it
No,
where it's
you're good. You're good. Everything's good the way it is. So,
okay, perfect. So I can't give really a definitive answer on that, right? Lebanon has not had a full working government for over 2 years, right? We finally have a full working government. We have Joseph On, who is our president, and we have the prime minister that was selected by Joseph On, and um, the, I think it's a beginning of a good era. I think it's one of those things where you have a good president. We're hoping that, from what we've seen, the characters that we have seen from those two have been that these are good people, and these are people who look out for the Lebanese people, and these are people who want to see Lebanon thrive. So I believe that there will be. What do they have in plan? What they're gonna put in there? We don't know yet. They really haven't implemented. They put out what the agenda is, but nothing has been implemented yet. This is all still fresh, right? And I'll put a tiny asterisk right here to say we're all cautiously optimistic, and cautiously optimistic because there were hands that were hidden behind these type of selections where you go, am I being a conspiracy theorist with this, or is it just a coincidence, right? It's kind of one of those things where you go, we don't know. So we're going to be cautiously optimistic. And I don't know what they have on their agenda, to be honest. But what I can tell you is this, is that the new prime minister has already put together a team that is going to be, they already put the government together. So that's the first thing, right? You didn't have a fully functional government, right? So you have now fully functional government, which means a lot of the things that were put on pause are going to start taking into effect. He also put in the a group that is going to be looking into corruption, right? They're going to be looking into corruption, and it's going to have to come back with sources and what are they going to be doing and how do we know that this is happening, right? It's not just hearsay type of thing, right? It's going to be judicial. The prime minister himself was a judge, right? He practiced law. He practiced Lebanese law, international law. He was the head of the International Court of Justice, right? And so he knows what he is looking for. So I'm very hopeful with him. Joseph On, who is the president, also, a guy that has stood by the Lebanese people and has always been vocal against oppression, right? And against the idea of taking, we have corruption. So he's always been vocal against that. So, and he wants to root that out. So again, optimistically hopeful. And these are the things that we have seen them do so far. I hope that answered the question, kind of.
As well as you could at
Yeah.
this point in time. All right, this question was written during registration. Has the U.S. ever discussed the future of Palestinians in Lebanon? And obviously, that's a question that is the past and now the present for our new government. What does one say?
Previously it has been discussed, but it was more from the stand of there was some pressures put on Lebanon a couple times to just simply take in more refugees, right? And they were like, we'll give you X amount of money if you just take in more refugees in order for that. Or it was they were giving more in UNRWA funding, right? Because they were funding UNRWA. There was money coming, not all of UNRWA. Let me rephrase that. They were not funding all of UNRWA. Their U.S. is just one country that has committed into putting in money into UNRWA, and the Lebanese UNRWA did see an influx of, if you want to say, donation from the U.S. into UNRWA previously. Right now, that has been completely cut out. Right, there's not even a little bit of money coming in. That has been completely cut. But that was the case. I don't think they care much about that, right, on how it impacts Lebanon. And even though that it is brought up quite a bit, I'm trying to put this into like a sentence here. The U.S. definitely has put in efforts, but that was depending on the administration.
Well, I'm wondering too, and this is another question, so maybe it's a good segue. Does the presence of Hezbollah in Lebanon impede U.S. aid?
Yes, yes, there are a couple aides that have been withheld, saying, of course they do get released sometimes, but it has always been like, oh, you need to get rid of Hezbollah. It's not that easy, right? Has it been withheld because of Hezbollah? Was it because of them that there's some things that are not working properly? Yes, I will say yes. That is an answer that I can say yes, definitely on. But that shouldn't be the case because we're trying to resolve it internally. Because as you saw through my presentation, you're dealing with quite a bit. You're not dealing with one issue or two issues or three. You're dealing with quite a bit happening all at the same time. And you have to strike that balance of sectarianism. And you have to strike the balance of they're very well armed and the Lebanese army is armed, but they're not armed enough yet, right? And so what are you going to do? You're going to have another civil war? We don't want that. So we're trying to politically move this forward which kind of gives you, kind of takes us back to the first question: what is the new government gonna do? The new government actually put in pressure and said, we're not gonna have Hezbollah be part of this government. You're not gonna have any more influence in this government. But after a little bit of back and forth, you know, Hezbollah did not get any, but Amal, which is another Shia militia, they got they got 4 seats, which is kind of like on the smaller side. Usually used to have a lot more. They are on the smaller side, and they were given, okay things, right? Like not nothing crucial to the government, nothing that will shut the government down. Essentially, that's I guess what I'm trying to say. And you can see how this new government, the prime minister, how he's leading in. He's leading in with, we know you have influence. You know you think you can flex on us. We need to start fighting back, but we don't want war anymore in our backyard, right? Because we don't want to fight against each other, right? Because the second we do that, we know Israel is going to take that as a opportunity to just come back in, right? Or an opportunity to say, oh, we're helping them, right? That's what they just did. They bombed the heck out of Beirut, and they were like, we're helping them. We're going to weaken Hezbollah. Okay, but that's not what you did. You just destroyed our infrastructure.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, right?
Well, we know that Israel has ulterior motives whenever they
Yeah.
do anything. So
Yeah.
I
So
think that's
I guess that's my answer, is that yes, that has been. I think it's going to change a little bit now because they don't have influence in the government anymore. And they are being challenged on all fronts by the Lebanese government and the Lebanese army.
I think we have time for only one more question. Your presentation was thorough, well, as thorough as it could be. We could go on and on. It's a lot to deal with. There's no question about it. And I think it's clear too that MEPN could address more issues related to Palestinians in Lebanon because it
Mm-hmm.
relates to Palestinians everywhere. Here's the
Mm-hmm.
question. How does support for the Palestinian cause vary across Lebanon? How did the Civil War affect attitudes to the Palestinians? That's a biggie.
I will have to read that. Do you have it written somewhere?
It's in the Q&A.
It's in the Q&A?
Well, is it still, Tom? It's probably not. Can I just repeat it for you?
Yes, please.
I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, he'll put it in the chat.
And I do apologize if I took more than I
No,
needed.
that's fine. Some of the questions you did answer, so there were other questions, but they have been addressed. Okay, there it is.
How does support for the Palestinian cause vary across Lebanon? How did the civil war affect attitude to the Palestinians? Okay, let's take the first one. How does support for the Palestinian cause vary across Lebanon? It does, depending which areas you are in Lebanon. Again, due to that tension and sectarianism that has existed since the creation of the country, right? It's been there. So I will say there is less in some of areas and there's more support in other areas. If you're asking me which areas have more support and which areas have less support, it really depends because some Christian areas have less support and they're less sympathetic towards the Palestinian, and other Christian areas are more sympathetic towards the Palestinian area, the Palestinian cause. And south of Lebanon is a given. South of Lebanon has always been and always, I think, will be in support. And north of Lebanon is also in support. Again, like I said, there's like maybe minority pockets that have less, but I would say the majority is more of a support. And how did the civil war affect the attitude towards the Palestinians? The civil war affected quite a bit. It created more tension. It created more dislike towards the Palestinians at the beginning, but then it kind of turned around. It turned around because the people who ended up sitting down on the table during the Ta'if and people that sat down and said, we need to end the civil war, they were they were essentially aligned. Some of them, not all of them, were aligned with the PLO at that time, and then they were more sympathetic, if you want to say. So does it cause it? Yes, I think it does affect the attitude towards the Palestinians. Just depends on who you ask. Some people say they caused more problems than we wanted, and other people say it didn't matter. We were in civil war. It didn't matter what happened. It just was going to happen.
I think we are at the end of the questions and at the end of the webinar, but I'm not done. First, I want to thank you, Maamoun, for joining us this morning. And as I said, you could go on because it's a complicated issue. There's no question about it. It seems that more than any other country in the Middle East, Lebanon has been the, if I can use the term, the dumping ground. And I don't
Yeah.
mean that dumping as negative to the people migrating to Lebanon, but it's
Mhm.
it's just been, how do you deal with such a huge influx over and over again? So
Mhm.
you've helped us understand the quandary. There's no question about it.